So today I'm joined by our big carrot holistic nutritionist, Sarah Dobeck. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for coming.
Our goal of today is to really stick a fork in this huge gluten debate.
So I guess it would help to start with like the difference between an intolerance and an allergy. So an intolerance anybody can have. We've all probably experienced them sometime in our life when we've had too much of something. But essentially, that's when you're feeling bloated, gassy, and your body's it's like spending too much time with one person. You become a bit intolerant and you need to take a break from each other for a while. Then sometimes you can come back and enjoy gluten again and in moderation. And again, it's like, you hear this all the time, but everything in moderation. If you're allergic to gluten, this is this is your immune system reacting to the protein, gluten, in your bread. And so your immune system is turned on. You can get all kinds of terrible symptoms. And what happens with celiac is people who have celiac disease is that the lining of their intestinal tract starts to get damaged because the body is actually starting to attack itself. And so these people lose weight, they can't absorb anything because their intestinal tract is damaged, they get really, really sick, and they're the ones that you remove gluten entirely and they feel better almost overnight because what's amazing is your intestinal tract can heal itself pretty quickly, but they can't even have a trace amount because it really impacts their health. So that is an actual allergy, and that person is going to live with that for probably the rest of their life.
What would you say is behind this change in trend or the interest in going gluten-free?
I think that people feel crummy. They don't feel well, and they've tried different changes in their health or maybe drugs, and they just aren't getting to the bottom of how they're feeling. I believe this. We've hybridized wheat to the point that it's perfect for processed food. So it's high in gluten, it's a big fat grain head, so you're getting huge yield off of your fields, which is good for farmers. Mm-hmm. It processes into bread and cake and whatever easily. So it's perfect for the food industry, but that variety of wheat is not perfect for us. Mm-hmm. It's just they've thrown the ratios of the protein off enough, and then that's the only variety of wheat that we eat over and over and over again. So some people who are intolerant to wheat, if they switch to an ancient version, so red fife is a really good example of wheat that, let's say, our great-grandparents used to eat. It's not great it's a little denser, doesn't make fluffy white bread, but some people just switch to red fife bread and they are fine because it's just enough of a different variety that their bodies are like, okay, well, this is a little different. So there's that too, is that we are eating the same variety of wheat over and over and over again because the whole processed food industry is buying the same variety. And that again comes back to switching it up. What research is showing is that gluten in our food can contribute to minor symptoms like bloating, gas, fatigue, the ones that you can live with, but you don't feel good day after day after day. So you can still go to work and you can still function, but you don't feel well. And so by looking at what people were eating, we sometimes find that there's an intolerance or an allergy sometimes, and gluten seems to be a pretty big one.
If someone is feeling these symptoms, it's a good trigger to them to consider experimenting with gluten in their diet or trying to remove gluten.
Absolutely. So there are, like I said, the symptoms are mild. Sometimes they can be horrible too, but generally they're mild, and by removing gluten, even for some people say within 24 hours, but usually a week, a month, if you can do 3 or 4 months, really getting it out of your diet, and we can talk about how tricky that is, but people really feel lighter, they don't feel bloated. A lot of people think that being bloated and feeling gassy is just how they are, and when you take out certain foods, and we're focusing on gluten today, but this can apply to all kinds of foods. All of a sudden they don't feel like that every day, and it just makes a huge difference. So there's no harm in experimenting with taking gluten out of your diet.
Let's discuss for a moment what exactly is gluten.
Sure. So really simply, it's the protein in certain grains. So when we think of grain, we often just think of carbohydrate, but a whole grain actually has carbohydrate, protein, and fat in it if it's left whole. And the proteins in wheat, spelt, rye, kamut, and barley in particular all contain gluten, which is the protein in the grain.
And then how does this protein go to interact with our body?
So if we have strong digestion, we'll break that grain down in our gut, and then different enzymes and different processes break it down into the protein. And we know that the protein is used in our body for muscles and building our blood, and all kinds of processes. So in the digestive system, it's broken down into those components. And if we don't have an issue with gluten, it's just used in the body, and the waste is excreted, and that's the end of the story. But unfortunately, the gluten, it actually breaks down into two other subtypes. Just really quickly, one is the one that people are intolerant to, and the other one is what makes bread doughy.
So let's talk about where we're finding this gluten now that we understand what gluten is a bit better and how it impacts our bodies. What kind of products are commonly full of gluten, or products that we would look to substitute out of our diet?
Well, it turns out that it's in a lot of our food, and especially the North American diet. We eat a lot of this. So the most obvious things are bread, pasta. If you think about wheat alone, bread, pasta, muffins, crackers, wraps. The base of the sort of the fast food or the convenient North American diet is wheat. So and that's just because we're using the flour. And then what happens is that components of wheat are used in, you can even find it on dried fruit because they use it to dust it to keep the fruit from sticking together, or it's a filler in something just to add, it's used as a filler in all kinds of products. So if you look at the ingredient list on a lot of processed food, you'll generally find wheat or gluten somewhere in that list. Just the property of gluten alone is sometimes extracted to make things doughy and give the food the property that you want.
So Sarah, what are some of the most popular pre-made products that you have here at the Big Carrot?
So the number of pre-made products is just growing and growing every day. One in particular, people really like the Mary's gluten-free crackers. There's another brand called Enjoy Life, and their whole purpose is to remove all the common allergens from treats and crackers, and particularly for parents who have kids who have a lot of allergies. So they're egg-free, dairy-free, gluten-free, sugar-free.
Wow, your one-stop shop.
Yeah, so that's a really popular line because parents don't have to read the label.
Yeah. What would you consider some of your most popular fresh products to be?
Well, fresh is interesting because when we talk to people about any health change, we always guide them towards whole foods. So if freshest is the produce section, right?
Yes.
And then you don't have to worry about gluten at all. So there's not much to worry about in any sort of anybody's produce section. But we do have, I think I mentioned earlier, like the treats that are made with coconut and dates, and they're cakes and treats and those sorts of things that are actually fresh and in the fridge because they don't last long because they're actually real food.
That's an interesting thing to wrap your mind around. My food's not lasting very long. You might be upset by that for a moment, but it does trigger you to think about the quality of the food and how naturally food would degrade over time, rather than us with this expectation that our food should last 2 to 3 weeks in a fridge. have to ask this question.
Mm-hmm.
What are the downfalls of a gluten-free diet?
So that's a great question, because anybody who makes a food and has it on the shelf and it's gluten-free is now labeling it. Mm-hmm. So people are starting to associate gluten-free with healthier, and that's not always the case, because in order to make, for example, your bread look and taste like your Wonder Bread or your processed bread, a lot of other things have to be added. So there's a lot of potato starch and maybe soy protein and xanthan gum and sugar. And so bread is really supposed to be flour, yeast, and water, right? Like traditional bread. So there should only be 3 ingredients. And now we're starting to see bread, as the example, having 15 ingredients in it. So if you have other food allergies, you're in a whole other, you're reading the ingredient list to see what else is in your food. But some gluten-free cookies are still cookies at the end of the day, right? So they're going to have sugar and possibly coloring. So there's a bit of a misconception that gluten-free equals healthier, and it can, but you have to know your products, and you really have to start to understand what you're eating.
So thank you for tuning in with Sarah Dobeck, our holistic nutritionist from the Big Carrot, and myself, Emma Glovcheski, exercise rehab specialist with Vital Steps and MedFit Rehab. We hope you try to experiment with a gluten-free or gluten-less diet in the future. Tune in for more on our wellness series to come.